Welcome to our webinar today. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant. I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar today on behalf of Global Government Forum that serves civil servants here in the UK and all around the world. I'm used to chairing webinars for GGF, but normally they are kind of online, a traditional type of webinar. So I'm really excited to be doing this hybrid webinar today. We have great people here in the room with us, but I also want to say hello to everybody who is joining us remotely as well. I know we've got lots of people registered to attend the webinar as well online. In terms of the topic for today's conversation, so just to set the scene a bit, the UK government has set the directive for what it says is a complete rewiring of the British state to deliver bold and ambitious long-term reform. And it said that a digital revolution will underpin the move to a more agile, effective and active state, which will help it focus on delivering its missions, and also which it thinks is essential to simplifying how citizens engage with government and their public services, and to have a more joined-up approach to those public services. So Global Government Forum, supported by Cognizant and AWS, we have done a new study, which I hope some of you have managed to read already, called Rewiring the State. For those of you at home, if you haven't, it's on the Global Government Forum website. Please do take a look at it after this webinar. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that study today and kind of the key findings from that study. So we'll go into more detail in that in a moment. But before we do all of that, I'd like to introduce our stellar kind of panel of experts that we have with us here today. So I'm delighted that we have with us Lord Gus O'Donnell, who is the former Cabinet Secretary and Head of the Civil Service here in the UK. Gus served under 3 Prime Ministers, so he served under Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and David Cameron as Cabinet Secretary from 2005 to 2011, and was then appointed to the House of Lords in January 2012. He played a leading role in the negotiations that went on before the eventual formation of the UK's first coalition government. And before he was Cabinet Secretary, he was Permanent Secretary to the Treasury and Press Secretary to Prime Minister John Major as well. So I think it's clear to say you really do understand the challenges, I think, of the civil service, which is important because we interviewed permanent secretaries for this report. So you are extremely well placed to understand the challenges that they are facing. Then we've got Yatin Mahandru, who is Vice President, Head of Public Sector and Health at Cognizant UK and Ireland, with 40 years of experience in the public and private sectors, supporting the delivery of complex, large-scale transformational programmes, both in the UK and globally. And in his role, Yatin focuses on how and where advances in technology can be beneficial to citizen services while delivering through empowered teams. So again, you were really interested in that research in terms of how it can help with those objectives. And last but by no means least, we've got Faye Holt, who is Director of UK Public Sector at Amazon Web Service, where she leads strategic initiatives across the UK's public sector landscape. And with over 9 years' experience at AWS, she oversees programmes and initiatives that cover all aspects of UK government, including AWS's strategic relationship with the Cabinet Office. And she serves as the executive sponsor for AWS's UK's Social Value Initiative. So I'm sure you'll agree with me. We have a great panel of experts here today. In a moment, in terms of the format, I'll be asking our panel a few questions about the research, why you wanted to be part of this research and some of the findings. But we want to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm going to be coming to you, our audience, for your questions and your comments as we go through. So at any moment, please be thinking about the questions that you've got. If one of our speakers says something and you really want to come in on something that they've said, maybe don't wait until I get to the Q&A, put your hand up. And similarly, if you are joining us remotely, whatever device you're using, there should be a Q&A function on your device. Please use that Q&A function at any point to send in your questions and your comments. I'm going to be doing a bit of juggling. I can see those questions here in front of me, so I will try and get through as many of those questions as we can before the end of our conversation today. So just to set the scene before I get on to those questions, because maybe not all of you have had a chance to read the report, but very, very quickly, in terms of the report that we are going to be basing a lot of our conversation on today, essentially, Gus very kindly agreed to lead interviews with current permanent secretaries. This is unique. I don't think it's ever been done before because, as you know, permanent secretaries, it's incredibly busy and challenging time. So to actually get so many of them to agree to give up their time for this study was incredibly impressive and very, very useful in terms of our findings. So we interviewed 12 permanent secretaries. In terms of the methodology, it was kind of semi-structured interviews where we based our questions around vision, skills, leadership, culture, and collaboration, all in that context of how important is it in terms of transformation and digital transformation in particular for them and the ministers they serve to be able to deliver on their objectives. And we had very honest and open conversations. Yatin was observing all of those interviews as well. We told the permanent secretaries they would not be quoted. So they are not quoted individually, which meant that we could have very open conversations with them. In terms of the results and the findings, again, do read the reports if you get a moment, but I think overall what we found is lots and lots of progress has been made on digital and data issues across government, more recently in the use of AI, but there's lots of room for more to be done. I think if you were going to summarise it in one way, that would probably be it. And we came up with 4 priority areas in that report. So those were that the government could do more, permanent secretaries, leaders in the civil service could do more to elevate digital to the core of government leadership, and we can talk about that in a moment. To do more to build transformation capability at all levels within the civil service. Thirdly, more could be done to unlock the power of data and AI. Although a lot was being done, there was still a lot more that could be done. And then finally, and I think this is an issue that's been kind of a stubborn challenge for a long time, could do more to have a more joined up approach across government as well. So they were the kind of 4 areas where we said that was where we would really like to see more progress being made. So in terms of the questions, I guess my first question to all of you here is, you've been involved in other research. Yatin, you've done stuff with Global Government Forum, AWS as well before. Gus, you've done lots of events and everything. But why were you so keen to be so involved in this particular piece of research? And Gus, I'll come to you first on that question.
Thanks for that, Siobhan. And the reason I was really interested in this was to actually get the view from permanent secretaries, rather than GGF had done some work with digital experts, digital leaders in departments. And the question was, is this translating at the top? Having been a perm sec, I knew that a lot of the solutions would require systems thinking. They would require not just thinking about the people in the technology area, but actually how do we translate this across to people delivering public services on the one hand, so there's that public-facing bit. There's a second bit about how do we actually use all these technical advances to improve the efficiency of the department. And so there was all of those kind of different things. And then there was the question of, but actually a lot of these issues go across departmental boundaries, so how do we get the perm secs talking to each other? So I was really keen to talk to them. I think one of the advantages we had, as Siobhan said, this is quite rare, was basically trust. So look, the reason I did this is that I wanted to help the public sector to improve the way in which they do these things. I wanted to get something out there which basically says, look, here are the opportunities, here are the obstacles, and like, can we work together to improve the obstacles to make public services better for people and to make departments more efficient? And this is against a backdrop where actually there's one line in Rachel Reeves' speech this morning where she talks about AI and efficiency. And if you think about where we are at the moment, we've got very high tax rates, probably going to go higher, and we've got requirements for public services that people want them to be even better. We've got big waiting lists and all the rest of it. So you need to think about how you use every opportunity you can to do these things. And what I was interested in was, so the opportunities, which we probably are quite good at, so what are the obstacles? And then thinking about the obstacles, was it that ministers weren't interested? Was it that perm secretaries didn't understand this stuff and were like leaving it to the techies? So I wanted to go through all of those and work out what the obstacles are. And I think in the report we've got a lot of them. We might go into more detail about them, but it was funny. It was quite interesting. So I'd done some work with the private sector through my chairmanship, as I was then, with Frontier Economics, about banks and dealing with legacy IT systems. And surprise, surprise, in the public sector, in departments, lots of legacy IT systems come up. Lots of inabilities of data sets to talk to each other. So lots of kind of technical issues that actually should be quite solvable. And then some rather big stuff, constitutional stuff, about the way we are constitutionally set up, which makes cross-departmental working rather more difficult. So that's
thanks, Yatin. We definitely will come on to some of those issues in a bit more detail. So, Yatin, as I mentioned, you've done other reports actually with Global Government Forum, but in those we've always spoken to senior digital leaders. So why were you so keen to be involved in this report?
So we'd done the AI report the year before, which was with GGF. We interviewed a number of senior CDIOs across the country on the challenges around data sharing, speed of adoption of AI, the challenges. And the reason I approached GGF with the idea, and I have to quickly say, it's not because of my charisma we met 12 permanent secretaries, it was because Lord Gus was there to talk to them. Just make sure everybody understands that. It was really the gap between, potentially, between policymakers and the CEOs, if we call them that, the permanent secretaries. And then what was the view of them in relation to their digital progress? And that was driven really by some of the commentary we got from various CDIOs, where they felt their departments were in their evolution. So for me, that was the main interest point, and that's part of what drove why we wanted to sponsor that. It was an exercise that would just help us gain greater understanding of the dynamics that our clients are experiencing in terms of improving citizen service.
Thanks. And Faye, same question to you in terms of your interest in this, hearing from the permanent secretaries themselves.
Yeah, I think for us, look, AWS is probably, not a new entrance in the market, but actually if you go back 20 years, were AWS as big in UK civil service? Were they talked about? Were they in departments? No, right, we weren't there. And therefore, as you look at the technology landscape and the new entrants coming into the market, 2 years ago, I don't think we were talking about certain kind of AI companies. And as that progresses and as that changes, I think what we need to understand in our position and as we kind of go on the cloud journey with departments is what are the other challenges they're facing? Because actually quite often we only get to talk to the digital bit of the department. And actually breaking above that is really quite difficult when you are a technology provider looking into government. Because, hey, you're a technology provider, go to the CDIO, but actually the challenges are so much more than that. And even just when we were talking earlier, the challenges go into the way the accountancy is done. It stems into every single element of the department. So for us, it's more about understanding, are the challenges that have been faced prior still the same challenges today, or are those challenges starting to change? And also, what is the perception of the challenges and what do people want to do about them? Sometimes there's kind of we're here and now, but having that outlook on where people want to go and what they're willing to do and how far they're willing to go to bring change is what's really, really important.
Thanks. So we're going to start with those challenges then. I'm going to kind of, in terms of like where we go now, I'm going to ask you all a couple of questions on those 4 key areas that we found in the report. But just a reminder to the audience, both here and remotely, if you have a question on anything that we say, don't wait till the end. So send in your questions or your comments, and we'll kind of make this as interactive as we possibly can. So in terms of the first priority area that we highlight in the report, we say that digital transformation should be recognised as a core leadership responsibility, and that civil service leaders, so permanent secretaries and their leadership teams, have a pivotal role to play in setting ambition, shaping structures and ensuring accountability. So to you, Gus, on this issue of leadership, I want your thoughts on how can the centre, because obviously as Cabinet Secretary you sat right in the centre, how can the centre help to empower senior staff, and maybe ministers as well might come into this? You're not a civil servant anymore, you can say what you like about ministers now, but to show more visible leadership on these types of issues.
So I think, firstly, they need to understand it all. They need to understand the opportunities and the risks. And let's be honest, there's going to be variable degrees of knowledge. I remember in my time having 9 pensions ministers in 5 years, right? Short-term issues, so who can, pensions, So it's like, and DSIT. I mean, that reshuffle we had, I'm scratching my head. They've been there a year. It's not been the best year for the government, let's be perfectly honest. And they've all shifted 1 seat along, and you've got Peter Kylett, who's at DSIT, getting to grips with stuff and all this stuff. And now we've moved, we've changed. And I remember saying to David Cameron when we started the coalition thing, and he told me what he wanted, and he said to me, what would you like most out of me? And I said, for you to keep ministers in place for as long as possible so they get to understand the subject. So there is a big issue with ministers, and understanding what the constraints are, what's possible, and all of it. So there's definitely that. And the centre can help with that. And ideally the Prime Minister can lead on this. But you need to be aware that the PermSecs as a group can do it. Second thing the centre has to do is it's what I call it, and this is very much a European jargon, the subsidiarity question, right? I know some of the civil servants in the room will know exactly what I mean by that. But this is basically what should be done at which level. So for example, what do you want the centre to say, here are the rules, here's how you operate? And what are the things where you want to say to departments, get on and do your own thing? And it was really interesting talking to departments where they were saying, look, if I'm running this really complex programme, I really don't want the centre telling me how to run my really complex programme. On the other hand, if we are talking about using an AI tool to help us with take minutes or something like that, yeah, one thing across the system could work very well. So there's certain things that the centre needs to do and certain other things that you want to leave departments to do. But you want to leave departments to do within a set of rules, because if the departments are working on a subject and there's a lot of data going to be generated, which is actually going to be incredibly useful for another department, and the whole, we give millions of examples where this is the case. If they haven't thought about interoperability and how those data sets share, then, you do it ex post, and we've all been there. It's a total nightmare. I mean, and, so I think the centre has to basically get that subsidiarity question right, then think about how do they ensure leaders are all trained. I mean, that's an important thing, because saying to PermSecs go on a training course doesn't make you popular at times. But I mean, I come at this as a bit of a nerd, so I started life teaching econometrics, so I'm really into stats and maths and computing, but that wasn't the case of all the PermSecs. So sometimes you had to start with, actually, let's talk about, what Gen AI is. Let's talk about why AI is probably a bit of a daft word because it covers so many different things. Let's talk about what are the ways in which digitization helps you, and so there were lots of things where I was thinking about training right from the top, because as a leader, you set an example. I remember in Treasury being made PermSec, one of the first things I did was got a coach, because basically being a bit of a nerd, an economist, tucked away, leading, managing people, and I wanted to get it across to people. It was perfectly okay to say you had lots of gaps in your skill set. It's perfectly okay and good for you to be going around saying, I'm not very good at this, I'm learning about it, but I'm going to hire. I used to hire private secretaries who were brilliant completer finishers, because every single appraisal I had would you say, not good on detail, right? Looks at big picture all the time, doesn't do detail, not a completer finisher. So you have to understand what you're good at. And building teams is what leaders do. And they look for, okay, what are the things I can lead on because I'm authentic and I'm there and I can do this stuff? And what are the things where I need someone around me to say, Gus, when you talk about, some of these things, it's quite obvious you've got no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, oh, really? And that's the other bit, was having private secretaries, and I have one on my right who worked for me as private secretary at the time, who are, how shall I put this, the opposite of deferential, who basically spend their lives telling you everything you did wrong in order to ensure you get better. And that's worth its weight in gold. So I think getting across to leaders those key things about what they're trying to do, and that's kind of generic, but it very much applies in this space where there is going to be very varying degrees of understanding of things like AI and data and, you know, stats. God, I mean, you'd think for ministers, the key thing they have to do is make decisions. So you think they would all be trained in decision making under uncertainty. Believe me, the number of times you kind of think, okay, I've just explained this in terms of probabilities. I think I lost them there along the way, you know. And you have to go back and think, okay, that's my fault and it is your fault. You need to explain these things in a way that gets across and people understand. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to comment on the list of things you weren't good at.
We don't have time.
But to Faye and to Yatin, I'm building on what Gus said there. So that idea of maybe permanent secretaries, not all of them have a full understanding of maybe digital and data issues and AI in particular. So how important do you think it is that non-technical leaders understand the importance of digital transformation when it comes to service delivery, you know, ultimately improving delivery to the public? And do you think they're doing enough to make sure they understand that? So maybe Faye, I'll start with you and then I'll come to Yatin on this one.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you know, if you to ask everyone in this room if they understood all of the AI announcements that happened globally yesterday, right? I can hazard a guess that no one will put their hands up. And we shouldn't and we can't expect people at that level to be able to keep up with the pace of change, because it's like nothing else that's ever gone on at the moment in terms of stuff coming out, news stories coming out, new ways where these technologies can be adopted to bring efficiencies. And therefore, on the flip side of that, I think we have to make it easy for them to understand the key points. But it's also making sure that they're aware of where those efficiencies can help within their departments or within their areas, but not just from a technology perspective. And I think this is the key bit, because all too often I think what happens is they go, okay, it's AI, or people are talking about agents, or they're talking about machine learning. So, okay, well, that will be dealt with over there, but they don't involve HR. They don't involve finance. And actually a lot of the benefits will come when those finance leaders, the HR leaders, understand where those efficiencies can be brought. So I think it's up to each and every leader to be educated in the impact that it can have and some of the risks, so that they can start to make educated decisions with the people sat next to them who do know the detail, but they can start to make educated and informed decisions on, is this the right direction? If we want to change this citizen-facing app or way that the citizen is going to engage with our department, do we feel like we're going to make the right efficiencies against the right risks? I think the flip side is if they're completely uneducated and they're just picking stuff up in the media or in the press, there is this danger zone that either they're going to become afraid of the technology and stifle innovation, or they're going to think that some of these risks that are talked about, etc., are, you know, they're going to happen on a daily basis, and they're going to not want to move forwards with the pace that I think they could be doing. So I think it is, you know, somewhat up to the private sector, somewhat up to the DDAP professionals to make sure they're educated, but in a top level way. We should not be sending them on 5-day training courses on the depths of agentic AI, whilst we would probably all love to do that.
Thanks. Yatin, what do you think on this? Do you think there is enough understanding yet, of PermSec's understanding the importance of the new technologies and their digital senior colleagues, the role that they can play?
So I think what I observed was just one aspect is there's always a gap between the policymakers. For them, some of them, AI is the silver bullet, and the PermSec then gets that pressure which they communicate to their DDATs, and some of the challenges aren't always recognized. You mentioned legacy, for example, Gus. So just to examine what pressure they're under, that's one. And then what can they do about it? I think what I saw was some who really did get the argument in terms of data, cross-departmental working, AI, what happens next. Some who had a more variable understanding. And what have they done about it? One thing that really struck me when we engaged them on, most Fortune companies we deal with and you would deal with would have the digital persona on the executive board. He or she would be there. And there were a couple of departments where The CDIO might be hidden away somewhere underneath a DG and a portfolio and then the CFO. And there were some who had their digital persona bang in the ExCo meeting to discuss with HR, finance, and the permanent secretary how transformation needed to be driven for citizen services. So in terms of their own capability, some of it would come from getting more proximate to those who know.
Yeah.
And most of them were very positive about their CDIO population and their DDATs, I think, from what we heard.
Yeah.
But it's the proximity argument. How close are they to you? So you don't need to know it all yourself, but have those who do know closer to you.
Yeah. Right. And I think there is a commitment to have CDIOs on boards, isn't there? But
Great
it's
point.
not being
They've,
done.
since the report,
Yeah.
Emily Middleton's spoken about, they're going to ask from a decent perspective that all departments have that
Yeah.
representative on the ExCo for a department.
Thanks. Thanks. We've got some questions coming in, so
Yep,
please
there's
do keep them coming
there
in. Oh yes, gentleman in the room.
Hi, Angus Farrow. Until recently, head of digital products at Department of Business and Trade. I think it's a great recommendation to say that senior leaders should have more digital skills, they should be our champions. But I think we should also be specific about what we're asking them to champion. And in particular, for our labour's phrase, it's been very difficult to get that senior backing for fixing the foundations. You know, maybe with the exception of the transition to cloud. There's been a lot of front-end work. UK is great, but we really haven't fixed a lot of the data models behind. And if I think of the two best data-centric organisations I've seen over 10 years, it would be Companies House and the National Archives. I don't think it's a coincidence that both of them are from Michael. So how do we get that? How do we get that senior backing to fix those foundations?
And can I, before you answer that, the question that's come in online kind of links to that. So Sarah has asked, how can digital tools or investment be better tied to government outcomes or citizen outcomes? So I think that's the argument for investment and making sure you get the investment right.
It's really interesting, and you'll get ministers really interested in this when they've kind of tied themselves to an outcome which requires you to do something that requires this better system behind it. And we've kind of observed, I can say this now, in the last year where it goes wrong. You know, you will have seen the big thing about missions and all the rest of it. Well, what happened with the mission boards? You know, like they've basically gone, let's be honest. I mean, the growth one's sort of growth and living standards now, sorry. But it's like slightly changed. So I think, you'll get ministerial buy-in if they think you're doing something they really, really care about. So, if you were in the Home Office and you were really, really doing something that you knew would stop the small boats forever, boy, they would love you, right? And but when you're doing something that's slightly more removed and they're not quite sure, or it might take longer, then you won't get as much ministerial attention. Now, not having much ministerial attention, as they would tell you in the National Archive, is brilliant at times, right? And it's something, when I worked in Washington twice in my career. It was fabulous to have that time difference where you were there and the ministers were gone, right? It was just unbelievable. You could do what you liked, right? And sometimes, you just want to be left alone to get on and solve a particular problem. As long as you're solving the right problem in the right way, that's fine. But, we do live in a world where it's not just the what, it's the how, and we see that when we all come on, I'm sure, and talk about digital IDs. There'll be some real issues about not just the what, but the how. And so I think, yes, it is really important to be able to deliver. And what we really need is some shining examples of success, We are not yet Estonia, right? We need some things. Now, when people talk to me about public services, the public, oh, it's all terrible. Have you applied for a passport recently? Do you want to tax your car online? There are 101 brilliant success stories. But the trouble is, because it's easy and it's like, they take them for granted and they say, oh, well, how long did it take me to get through to HMRC on the phone? So we do need to understand that, and sometimes we need to kind of really target success, which I am doing later this week with the Civil Service Awards. But, so I think we need to do that within our departments, but also get it across the ministers. And in some ways for ministers to realise that actually they came in saying they were going to be about delivery, about delivering missions, lower waiting times, all the rest of it. So we need to try and get the two things joined up. And the fact that the missions thing hasn't really worked and needs to be revamped, and I have some ideas about how you might do that, I think is one of the issues that will tie in the political and the civil service end.
Did either of you want to come in at all on that? I do have another question, which I'm going to put especially to you, Faye, because I think it linked. But did you want to add anything on this?
Just one thing, I think it is about mobilizing behind a concept or an idea, and maybe digital IDs is that mobilizing impact, which was mentioned in your forward in the report, and that's another thing that came to pass post that.
Funny that.
So, Faye, a question back to you, I think, because you said we can't expect permanent secretaries to go on like a 5-day training course on AI. But Sarah again has asked, given time pressures and fast-moving technology, what type of training methods do you think might be the best way to upskill senior civil servants?
Yeah, I think that's actually something that we've battled around over the kind of past 10 years. And I would actually answer that in two ways. The first is one that we really like to run, and we did it back in the day when people didn't understand cloud, right? Genuinely you were going in and people thought the only cloud they knew was the iPhone storage, right? Is it on there, etc. And it's a simulation where you get all the execs together in a room, ranging from HR, finance, etc., and you take them through what it could do, but at an exec level with, budgets, with media, etc., and making sure it's done so that they understand it. But I think for me, it's more about letting them know the success stories that have happened, and there's definitely more than 101, which is good news, but letting them know the success stories that have happened, letting them know the challenges, unless they really understand some of these challenges and being quite forthcoming with those and quite outright. As you said, Yatin, the minister's going to point in one direction and say, okay, go do that, and we want to target the efficiency of 30%. And not knowing why that's not possible, or, okay, well, we need to do that, but we're blocked because these tools aren't available for us yet because we've not gotten through procurement, or, well, the CISO has said, actually, we're not able to use these certain tools to achieve that outcome. And I think that is an area where I think it's going to be, because the landscape is constantly evolving, there's not a one-hit answer. Come do this half day and everything will be fine. Well, in 6 months, all that information might have changed. And that is the hard part. So I would say it's through constant iterations, snippets, sound bites, and proper briefings on some of those large-scale projects, but also importantly, what is not going well and why. If they understand that part, they can work to help.
Yeah. And would you say, also, one of the things that came out of the report, I think, is there wasn't enough sharing of good practice and sharing of success stories, which in itself could be a quite easy way of training kind of senior level as well, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. When I started the group of the top 200, we used to have people telling stories about things they worked on and what had worked and what hadn't. And it is really insightful, because you get permsecs talking about their journey through this and where it went wrong, and I think along the way, everybody's learning, going, right, okay. So I do think that sharing both the successes and the failures is important. You can rely on the National Audit Office and the media to share all the failures, but the successes are less spoken about. And actually, every success, in my experience, has come through a number of earlier failures. And so taking people through that journey is to look, don't be put off, this is going to go wrong. The whole test and learn stuff and all the rest of it. There are ways of getting to this, and success does require you to learn as you go along. And there's little things. I think with permsecs, I would have said, probably, we're going back a few years now, but like, give them all ChatGPT, let them use it and let them start learning these things, and like, what does it do? Oh my God, it gave me that ridiculous answer, So they lose that kind of naivety that, oh, this thing does it all, or, an understanding, and then say, oh, by the way, you put a lot of confidential information into ChatGPT to get that. Do you think that was a good idea? Like, oh, really? So, you can, I think, hands-on experience, or having a child under the age of 30 is hugely important for learning.
Yeah. Actually, we've got an intergenerational question come in as well, so I might go straight to that one, and then I'm going to come back to talk about capability building, which was the next section in the report. But John has asked, one of the challenges from digital citizen services is that the needs, expectations and approaches for different people are very different, and in particular, depending on their generation. So how do you propose to create inclusive public services delivered digitally, but that don't leave out citizens that don't have a kind of digital skills or digital kind of equipment. Yatin, you're nodding on this. How do we make sure digital services are inclusive?
Well, firstly, I think it is critical. When you hear policymakers, the majority of them from the Labour administration will always use the phrase "nobody left behind." And just to give you a quick anecdote, at Digital Health Rewired, I heard somebody from the NHS talk about, if you don't use the NHS app, no services. Well, that'll be interesting for my 87-year-old dad. You know, let me get you an iPhone. It's not going to work. So I think you want to have the majority of people using digital. You could aim for 75, 80, 85%. It's going to vary by government service. So I'm a user of the NHS app now. Would never dreamt I was going to use it in the way I do. But you probably need people like the folks we work with, and you do too, Faye, Digital Poverty Alliance and others. You need to train, you need to help, and you need to be ready to help those who would be excluded through whatever reason, where they're at in the economic spectrum or age or disability. That part of it needs to be part of the planning for inclusive citizen services. And that might mean a different kind of access.
Yeah.
Can I also come in on that? Because I think it's super important, but it actually goes the flip way as well. We can be using technology to be more inclusive. And there's a good example, it's Swindon Borough Council have used AI in translation services to allow their citizens to communicate when English isn't their first language. So I think, you know, whilst we have to go, and as you say, you know, I think 85% of the average number, that the goal was to get 85% of these applications, etc., used digital natives, but also technology can go a long way into transforming people who aren't tech savvy or English isn't their first language, who've got other accessibility issues on that journey.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is, there is here a big difference between the public and private sector, because the private sector is going to put stuff out there where they're going to make money.
Absolutely.
And in the public sector, we are making our services available for everybody. And we are, in particular, dealing with a kind of group that the private sector will go nowhere near, because they're so expensive and they're so hard, right? So it is different. So sometimes you need to think, and I'm really going to see Yatin, that answer, that you both got this, and you've obviously worked with us enough to know that. So we need to find ways. And I completely agree about, this isn't just about giving up on saying, oh, well, you know, we have to do some other way of doing it. I actually think the technology, I mean, the one that got me was, I think this was in the States first, where there was this issue about people not taking their medicine, older people, forgetful. And they used to have these things where the pills would ping round in 4 hours, and there'd be a ping, and they'd go and they'd take them. And of course, sometimes they'd take them and they'd throw them away. And they actually had something on a phone where they'd put something on the pill, so as it went down through your system, so they'd actually taken it, they could tell if you'd taken it. And I was thinking, wow. You know, so if you think, you know, and of course the problem with technology is at the moment, I regard it as sort of, we're at 101 stage where everyone's thinking about this in efficiency terms. Basically, how many of you in this room can we get rid of? Because we can, you know, like replace you with an AI or something. The second stage to me is like, how do we use this really creatively to improve things? And I'm trying to get people to think about both of these at the same time. But it is, with the pressure on money and all the rest of it, and this is true in the private sector, big time. You know, the companies I work with at the moment, I would say nearly everything they've used AI and all the rest before has been on cost efficiency stuff and getting rid of tasks and thereby being able to reduce their wage bill.
Brilliant. We do need to crack on. We've got lots to cover, and we've got other questions coming in as well. But the issue that we've covered already about training came up under one of our priority areas, which was building capability for transformation. And in there, we talked about skills, we talked about training, we talked about recruiting tech talent, and that was one of the biggest challenges into the public sector. But because of the mix that we have on the panel here, we also talked about, in that section of our report, the relationship between the government and private sector tech suppliers. And I just want your thoughts really, given that you're three of you sat here on the kind of stage, is looking ahead, what would your ideal relationship be like between government and private sector suppliers? Gus, I'll come to you first and then we'll get maybe your thoughts.
So definitely it will be my ideal relationship with a private sector supplier would be long-term, strategic, trusting. Right? And so that would be, no, you're not ripping me off, you're not making massive profits out of this. I'm going to stick with you for the long term because basically, you know, if you change every few years, it's just never going to work. And strategic, we are going to, and Yas and I had a really good conversation about this. I'm not going to come to you and say, I want you to put in this system to solve this problem. I'm going to come to you and say, this is my problem. These are the outcomes I want. How do I do it? And I want you to co-invent with me what the solution is, so we do it together. And I want you in the end to be able to transfer a lot of your skills to the civil service so we can do it. And so that you are there to do the bits that you do best, but we are not in such a difficult situation that if you walked away, we could not carry on. So I think that's kind of complicated to get that balance, but I would say the word that really is important in all of that is trust.
Yeah. So to Yatin and Faye, I think from the perm sector that we interviewed, they wanted a similar relationship, but there were some frustrations, I think, in some of the interviews. So from your perspectives, what should change? What would you like to see kind of going forward? Yatin, I'll come to you first.
So I think that was the conversation we had based on the views of some of the permanent secretaries. I think our view is there's an element of commoditization around. We deal in skills, so slightly different in some ways. And to us, we have the ability and the appetite to build a longer-term relationship that's outcome-based. We also get that government doesn't want to go back to the days of the black box outsource where all the skills were taken by the outsourcer and the government was left with none as either an intelligent customer function or own capability to vet and deliver. So there is a tricky balance that you need to achieve there. But I think that's where the biggest reward is in that complex conversation where you use our investment, your investment, which will not match the government's necessarily in AI, the latest skills, because that's what we're in the industry for, and how we can get that benefit to government in a way that's constructive for both of us. And it does come down to trust because it means you're writing an outcome-based contract, not you'll give us an agile team of X and do Y. And that's the mindset change, I think, that we do need.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of it's been said, but for me, it's about true partnership. And I think trust is a big word, but also, you know, the days where, okay, we're just going to bring the supplier in to kick the supplier, never give any positives, you know, there needs to be an element of people wanting to work together for the greater good. And actually, I don't think we're in a bad position with that. And when you look to more where the partnerships can come together in terms of skills, there's really good things going on right now that are stemming out of the Cabinet Office and CCS, and they're working together more on procurement and what can be done. But, you know, a good example, the skills bootcamp that they're holding for cloud skills and AI skills, it's got all of the big tech suppliers in there helping advertise it, helping bring the people, making it easy for those people to be trained up. And I think when we can lean in with the departments to do more of that and showcase that actually private sector and public sectors to come together to tackle the skills gap, or hey, we've got contacts in academia that maybe X department don't have. Let's come and create some kind of hub where you're all located on the same campuses and do something there. I think there's some really good things that can come out of that, but I think it's trust, but it's true partnership and understanding each other's objectives.
Great. So trust and partnership, I think, and that definitely came out of the interviews that we had, I think. So just to say to the audience here and at home, I've got 2 more sets of questions, and then the rest of the time we will be doing Q&A. So please have your questions ready. The third area that we covered in the report was the need for a more joining up, unlocking, we called it, the full power of data and AI. So again, I'll start with you, Gus, because I mean, I was in the civil service from 1997. We seem to have been talking about kind of joining up data and better data management for years and years. So in your thoughts, what are the kind of stubborn barriers to better data sharing, and why are they so hard to overcome?
So it comes back to legacy stuff, because a lot of this was started individually by different departments. There's issues about privacy and understandable issues about privacy. In an ideal world, the economist in me wants to join up HMRC's administrative and tax data with DWP's databases, with health databases, so I can analyze stuff and get it all going. That raises all sorts of issues, and there are all sorts of gateways at the moment that you'd have to go through. But the potential is high. So we need to think about, to what extent can we do this? To what extent can we make those databases available for researchers? You know, one of my jobs is I'm president of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and their ability to actually analyze what's going on in certain, you know, some of the key areas of public spending is limited by their ability to actually get at data, and, you know, it gets you into whole areas of anonymization and de-anonymization and all sorts of areas of how secure you can do this. But I think that's really important. I'll give you one classic example where I think it comes back to what Yatin was saying about actually you need to start this right at the beginning. So kind of at the moment there is, I'm sure you're not, some of you who aren't in the Department of Education may not be aware of this, there's a bill going through Parliament for children's wellbeing in schools, right? I'm a big into the wellbeing stuff. So children's wellbeing, right? There is actually nothing in the bill about measuring children's wellbeing. Every one of my colleagues in the Lords has completely knows what it is that's driving children's wellbeing. It's phones, it's sleep, they've got 1,000,001 ideas, but they don't really worry about evidence, right? So what I'm really sure about is I don't know. And I really want to find out what the answers are. So I want data on children's wellbeing. The only data we've got at the moment is the PISA stuff that tells us we're the worst in Europe. So this is a massive problem for the UK, right? So I put down an amendment in the Lords to say, let's start measuring children's wellbeing properly, like we measure adults' wellbeing. The ONS does it. And I'm fighting, right? I'm getting pushback. If anyone here from the Department of Education, could you kindly, you know, like, talk to them, like, and they're saying, oh, it's not necessary. Schools can do this themselves. Now, that is the heart of what goes wrong. You start the data collection, and they've all got their own definition. So schools saying, well, you know, we've defined well-being, and it's all going up, and it's related to this or that. Well, how do you know? So basically, you know, I'm saying make it voluntary, you know, and all the rest of it. But please, department, give them a kind of template. Give them some stuff that you can all collect the same data, so it's comparable. So school A can say, actually, you know, if you look at school B and C, which in other ways take in the same kind of kids and all the rest of it, we can compare and contrast, and we can try and work out what are the key things that are mattering here. And you know, in our surveys, we can look at things like sleep, exercise, you know, relationship with parents, all sorts of things. So the reason I tell that story is not to push my amendment, but I am, but to say this starts with thinking about data in the right way right at the start, and the way you start collecting what you collect, how you collect it. You know, I was listening to something on the minimum income guarantees, you know, guaranteed basic income. And that was a really interesting thing in Canada at one point, and they started an experiment on it, and they got paper in 101 cardboard boxes that nobody's ever analysed because they just didn't have the digital stuff to do it. So basically, you need to start off by thinking about, with a policy, how are you going to tell whether this works or not? How are you going to do the evaluation? What kind of data do we need to collect? How do we need to collect it? And so all of that, you know, and it comes back to basic things that I mentioned earlier about interoperability, you know, standards so that, you know, if it's, you know, God forbid something's in Department A 1 minute and then it moves to Department B, so that, you know, you've got some continuity and understanding. So that to me will be my big thing.
Well, actually, we did have a question from Heather who said, if you had a magic wand, what one change would you like to see delivered in the next 12 months?
Become Prime Minister? No? No, that's not allowed, is it? Magic wand. Oh my goodness.
I mean, would it be data? Would it be something to do with data sharing?
It would be to do with my magic wand. Yeah, I'd get a digital ID in, and I would get it, bung it through severely, and I would start being a little bit more. No, not a little bit. I'm very kind of clear about we are going to be much more evidence-based.
Right.
Because I see so many policy areas now, and I see so many political parties selling moonshine, where there is a more, and the fake news that's out there. We really need good, solid evidence. And the private ONS, they're struggling because,
we could do a whole
thing
webinar, I think, on digital and fake news. But coming back to kind of data and data sharing, so to Yatin and Faye, I mean, Gus there has mentioned lots of issues around data standards, better sharing, but also cultural issues about people not kind of thinking about sharing it or being a bit reluctant to share it. Did anything surprise you in terms of what we heard from permanent secretaries on data sharing? But also, is there some good progress that we learned about as well that's being made? Yatin and then Faye.
Sure. So I think, firstly, data sharing's moved on a lot. Our first claim to fame as Cognizant, I have to get this plug in, is that Sir Jeremy once tweeted about a report we wrote in, I think, 2016 on data sharing when we first entered the government market. So that's our sole claim to fame, actually. I just had to get that in. But I think things have really moved on. So there are 3 examples in the report. There's one between HMRC and DWP that supports universal credit. There is one around DFE, but I'll come on to that bit about the sharing of data from the schools. And the third one was the outcomes linked data, business outcomes linked to data, BOLD, the MOJ, MHCLG one. So some of the PermSecs quoted those examples. I mean, it's like 3, and data is so massive in government. I think DCIT just published a valuation of our data value as a country, and it was in the billions. So that is small. The observation that came across was it's not so much about the technology. And in fact, there's a statement in the report that says it wasn't always also about the legalistic aspect. There was an element of trust and accountability. I think the comment, Gus, was that if I'm the permanent secretary, I own my data. It doesn't matter where else it ends up. I'm still the accountable officer, or whatever the phrase is. And I think unless that challenge and that blocker is somewhat removed in the sense of you are sharing the data, and yes, there could be some legal challenges, but they need to be looked after, then you've got a way of sharing the data even with the schools. Because that would be a DFE data set, essentially.
Thanks, Yatin. Faye.
Yeah, I think there was 2 particular comments in the report that kind of struck a chord. The first was that we've done bits, and I won't quote these precisely, but we've done bits, but the impact isn't there, effectively, right? There's bits of goodness, but the whole impact isn't there. And the second one was around the interoperability that comes as you build siloed data sets. And I think for me, if we were sat here a year ago, I'd almost guarantee we would have got a panel question on, will we ever move past POCs? Because it was like POC hell across government. Everyone was doing POCs. We have moved past that. And I think we also need to recognise that there has been good success, right? The fact that we're past that, the technology is being used, it's being used for good. So if you look at examples like UK Biobank are using it for better patient medical outcomes and getting the treatment process to a better path. You've got local councils starting to use it in a completely transformative way to make huge efficiency savings. And I think sometimes we're very hard on ourselves because that was in just 12 months. So if you go 12 months from now, where is this going to be? But I think for me, whilst there's a whole host of goodness, actually we're at the beginning of the AI journey. So we're kind of here using it for the basis of repetitive tasks or trying to clone someone who's sat there, who's, getting the handwritten forms and putting them into the system. We're using it at a very, very basic level, and that comes back to, well, when we're measuring the efficiency gains, they're not all that good. Because actually what's going to happen is over time, it'll move to a place where we're starting to use agents as team players. And that, if you read the McKinsey study, by 2028, all the interactions we have with generative AI, 1/3 of those are going to be with agentic AI, so with agents. So actually, that's 3 years away. And in terms of the efficiency gains in government, that's when we'll see the true efficiency gains. Not by putting little pilots in place across, a couple of thousand people and going, hey, do this repeating task. Yeah, that's great. But actually, we've got to go on this journey and take them across. So I think for me, there's a whole host of good examples from borders, missing people, education, well-being, healthcare, where data sharing and data collaboration is something that I think all of our citizens want. And I would be surprised if people started to click the button that says that they didn't want to share that data. However, I think there needs to be a bit of a speed up in terms of the legal barriers and the constraints that break those APIs down, The second thing in that is the systems currently aren't set up to do that. So either there needs to be an investment to build new data lakes from scratch, or the legacy modernisation has to happen to enable it, and that is the gap that no one talks about.
Thanks. I know we've got a question here, but just on what, and I'll come to you next, but on what you said there about you think most people will tick the box. We've got a comment from John who has said he thinks that the public are surprised by just how disconnected the data is, that actually their assumption is government is already sharing data more than it currently is. However, I would say, is government in a no-win situation where people assume it's being shared or they want it shared when it comes to something that's going to affect them? But when you talk about digital IDs, for example, there's a real pushback on I don't want my data shared in that way. I don't want government to have oversight of all of my data. So is this a situation where government can't really win?
I think we've got to get to a situation where people understand the benefits of it all. You know, it's crazy that if I walk out of here and get run over and get taken into a nearby hospital, they may not know that I'm allergic to penicillin. I'm not allergic to penicillin, right? But they may not know my blood group and all of that. Like, wouldn't it? These are obvious things. So we've got to explain to people the benefit to them of the sharing. And then, you know, if you take the Estonian example, which, you know, we were in Singapore at that conference with the guy who did it all, the key there was letting the public view everything that the state had on them so that they knew exactly where they were, and they built trust to the extent that when they had a hack, actually it was a blip, and people didn't kind of fall apart and say, oh my God, this is all terrible. So I do think we need to start selling the benefits of it. And, you know, it's like, I remember my day, and this shows you that it's not about AI. My day, we set up the system whereby, you know, you tax your car online, and that was, you know, getting together a database on your MOT, your insurance, your registration, and, you know, and payment system, you know, and like, boom. It happens, you know, and I used to have to get all of those bits of paper and queue up in the post office to get a little disc. I mean, you know, this is transformational. And you can do it 24/7, you know, so what an improvement in public services. And it had absolutely, that was all about data and digitization. It was nothing to do with AI.
I think we often quote Estonia and Singapore in terms of how joined up they are, but they are also the countries where you have the highest levels of trust in your government. And I think that may be an issue as well in terms of, even if you tell the public, here's all the information we have about you, is the public going to believe that's all the information that you have about them?
Well, we should tell people about what the important thing about Singaporean civil service, which this audience will love. They pay a lot better.
All for it. We have a question here in the room.
Agree with all the takes so far. I think the National Data Library, AI, shared outcomes fund, these are all good things which are essentially solving the same externalities problem. HMRC invests in its own APIs, doesn't have HMRC. I suppose my frustration is that a lot of the basics are not being invested in. I mean, I was part of the nascent data architecture community a few years ago. It was just allowed to die off. And why did we allow that to happen? You had 40, 50 data architects from around government talking about how they could get better data interoperability, and for some reason it was just not invested in. Likewise, I'm taking a data standard through the open standards process. It's been 2.5 years. How can it take us that long to decide a data standard? Lord O'Donnell, just on your point about the data, I think we often do collect the data, but we kind of absorb it into Whitehall. So my wife worked for the Children's Commission, and they've got amazing data from the Big Ask, but it was kept internal and used to publish very good policy reports, but the raw data was not published. And we've done the same at DBT. We've got the Business Perception Survey, and we don't publish the raw data. We publish very good reports, but we don't make it available externally.
Well, can I just ask, why don't you make it available externally?
You'll have to ask stats colleagues. All kinds of sensitivities around it, a sense that it's been used for internal policy making, and that's the primary value from it. Sometimes it just doesn't come up on people's minds. They think, well, we've done it, we've published our report, job done.
So ask the Perm Sec, tell him that Gus is going to put in an FOI request for that data. And what are you going to do then? One of the great things about FOI is it reversed the, there are lots of things wrong with it, don't get me wrong. One of the good things was it made you think about why are we keeping this secret? And like, if we had an FOI request, will we publish it? And if the answer to that was yes, I'd say, well, look, we
and
should
again, to
publish
be
this
fair, I think in the
proactively.
latest government strategy, it's published unless there's a reason not to, I think, is the latest approach. But there's probably a lag, and there's probably a lot of data that isn't yet
But I don't know
published.
the answer to your first question as to why those things that started didn't get carried through. Obviously, it wouldn't have happened in my day. But
I suppose not the specifics of them, but just that sense that these kind of basic ingredients,
Yeah.
we could just get right, we could just commit that it will take less than a year to get a data standard agreed to,
Well-
and that we're going to have a data architecture community.
So the one thing I would push back on slightly there is when, as an economist in the Treasury, we'd say, look, here rationally are the obvious things we should do to change our tax system. Blindingly obvious, everyone knows, we've known it for decades. It's like the planning system. We know what to do, and we never get it done. And to be honest, that's I used to say to the economists, you need to be two things, two my P's, professional and persuasive. And if we're not persuasive, it's our fault. Right? So we need to find ways to persuade people of the benefits and get it across. So we shouldn't look back and say, oh, well, it all fell apart. Well, you didn't persuade people of the benefits sufficiently well that they wanted to carry on. So I'm going to hit it back.
We've got another question here, and I'm conscious we've got one more coming in, and there's one more question I want to, but lady there.
Thank you. Hi, Rachel Miller from the Home Office. Gus, you mentioned you had ideas to revamp the missions. I'd love to hear them.
Oh. Yeah.
Very quickly, because we can also carry on, you can have a chat with Gus after on that, but
It does come down to something we're going to say here about when I was in this forward, about the problem we've got with the constitutional setup, right? In that Secretaries of State are constitutionally required to do certain things, the money goes to them, and that's the way it works. If you look at the missions, they're nearly all cross-government, which is great. So what you need to run a mission is something like we've got for the National Security Council, which is essentially, you think, if there's a mission which requires 3 departments to talk to each other, you need a setup, which is the 3 ministers and perm secs and the people in the delivery agencies round that table together. So you don't have a cabinet committee with just ministers, you don't have a group of officials, you have the 2 together, and all the officials come up and they say, right, Minister, you've said, here's the outcome you want. It might be safer streets, whatever, right? Here's the issues around that, and getting all of that, and here are the political trade-offs and the answers to it, and then you get the politicians to actually state their views about how you should manage those trade-offs and the decisions you should come to. And you don't leave the room till you've got decisions. That's how you do delivery. Yes, then you can kind of get it into like Michael Barber's type delivery units, but it's actually that first bit that's the really crucial part of getting missions to work.
Thanks. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to put the questions and we'll have to keep the answers quite brief. But this one came in a while ago, and I think we had this one in advance as well. So Mark asked, how do you plan to involve arm's length bodies? Is this central government only, or have you considered how arm's length bodies are engaged? So I think it's, how does rewiring government apply to arm's length bodies as well? Do all of the things that we talk about in the report apply equally to arm's length bodies? And I think Mark is from the Environment Agency. Faye, you're nodding. So how important are these issues for arm's length bodies?
No, from my perspective, it's something that over time we've kind of, we don't just gravitate towards the kind of, but we do go to the arm's length bodies. And I think when it comes to data sharing and interoperability and interaction, that bit is key. And in the audience, you said about the data architecture. Communication is at the centre of this. And at the moment, if departments work in a siloed departments and the arm's length bodies work in their silos, well, guess what? Nothing's going to get really done, and the impact is going to be minimal. So I think in all of this, everything applies to the arm's length bodies, and they should, 100% be at the same level and be represented at the same board as every one of the departments.
Right. Yeah, and Yatin, similarly, I think when we were interviewing the permanent secretaries, they weren't just talking about their department, were they? They were also talking about the wider ecosystem that they sit over.
Yes, they were, and it was the the case where every department that had a number of ALBs, they were doing exactly what Faye was talking about just now. They were equating them to the core department. We're involved in a number of programs which will mean onboarding significant ALBs, and we have to treat them the same as another major department.
Yeah.
I would say one thing to, is it Mark?
Yeah.
Environment Agency, you've got one of the hardest jobs, right? Because knowing DEFRA, you know, great permanent secretary, you had Tamara, you've got Paul Kissack there now. There are lots of agencies and they've all got environmental bits to them and they don't add up. And someone's got to work out, there are trade-offs between those two, and someone's got to sort them out. They've got remits for each agency, which on their own makes sense, but actually you can find that two of them kind of doing things which actually don't make sense together. So there is a bit missing at the top, I would say. And that's the kind of really crucial bit. I think individual agencies do a great job, but actually there is something missing above.
Thanks. If you do have any more questions in the room, put your hand up because this will be the final 5 minutes. But there was a question in from Rob, and this is to you in particular, Gus, because I think this was your recommendation in the report, which is, can you say any more about the recommendation of allowing civil servants to trade pension contributions for higher pay?
This has been my hobby horse for a very, very long time. I put it to Gordon Brown, George Osborne, various chancellors of various parties. And coming back to what I said before, I was professional but totally unpersuasive, right? And but my basic point was, if you're a civil servant coming through the system, you get to that point where, you know, you've been renting, you're thinking about a mortgage, you're thinking about family, you need to get, you need to go to the building society and say, please can I have a mortgage? And when did they ever ask you about your pension? Never. It's all about your pay. We're pay light, pension heavy in the civil service. And I think that you could put to people, we need to pay a lot more up front because that allows you onto this ladder. And you know, your pension could be reduced in a net present value equivalent way, right? So that it was revenue neutral over the medium term. Now, the reason this doesn't work is, God bless the accountants, right? So why every chancellor, when it was explained to them, and I had to do the explaining, to which in the end kiboshed my own idea, was said, well, this sounds great, Gus. Yeah, we're all with you. So what will it do to our debt and deficit figures? Because remember, I'm in the Treasury. And so I said, well, you know, obviously you're going to pay more, so the deficit's going to go up. And they said, oh, yeah, but the debt's going to come down. Actually, no. The debt's not going to come down because this is part of pension liabilities, which are unfunded tax liabilities, which are not on the balance sheet. So it won't show up anywhere. So you'll get the bad news, but none of the good news. Thanks, Gus. Get lost, right? That's what happened. But if they say to you, okay, well, maybe we'll put the debt, pension, the tax liabilities on the balance sheet because that's sensible, isn't it? And he said, well, you know, that will more than double your debt or something. You know, it's huge. Huge. And then they do say, get absolutely lost, stop wasting my time. So we do need to think sometimes about whether the accounting treatments we're giving things, I mean, this is bizarre, isn't it, are driving policy in a ridiculous way. And you can quite often see it in the way that certain shibboleths or certain ways of thinking about things, you know, drive things which lead to rather bad outcomes. If you think about what actually determines a kid's success in life, you know, you would think it was only about exam results if you looked at some of the policies we've got. And when you look at what's the determinant of their future well-being and their future earnings, it turns out it's more about other things.
And the
exam
pension,
results matter, but
if
not
you
everything.
haven't read the report, the pension pay issue was in the context of recruiting tech talent in particular into the civil service. I've got a question, Yatin, for you, because I think this was something you were particularly keen on asking when we started the interviews, was about the National Data Library idea and whether that would help in terms of kind of bringing data together. John has asked, who's pulling together the government's data dictionary? But I think he must mean the data library, unless there's something else that I'm not aware of.
I'm assuming it means the National Data Library. And that did come up in conversations, and there was a varying degree of responsiveness to it. It was just an awareness thing, I think. DCIT, since we did the report, have been recruiting. They've been looking at what the solutions are, and they're progressing that. What is happening perception-wise, I don't know within the different departments, but I think some perm secs were far more aware of it than others in terms of what the National Data Library is meant to do in terms of federated data between departments and enabling better decisions.
Which kind of comes back to your point, which is there are these great ideas and sometimes they just don't seem to go anywhere, don't seem to, you know,
I think
get off
I'd
the
say
ground.
for the National Data Library, it's early days, and I just hope it's early days of more to come.
We've spoken about that. We think they're a good team. It's a good project.
Good.
Good. So in the last couple of minutes that we've got, unless there's a final question in the room, I wanted to ask the three of you, so you know, you've been involved in this report, we've got the findings, we've had lots of feedback from permanent secretaries saying they've shared it now with their senior teams. What would you like to see change as a result of this research? I'll start with you, Faye, and we'll go this way.
Yeah, I think for me, there's kind of three things. First off, we don't want to be sat here in 5-10 years' time with the same challenges talking about data silos, right? I think there's some things where we've just got to recognise that transformation is there for the greater good, regardless of what government is in power, regardless of what, you know, minister is currently looking after that portfolio. But some of these conversations that we've hit on are, everyone's saying that it's needed. So let's just crack on. And I think that's step number one, is we want to see change. I think step number two for me is making sure that, you know, as much as we can, help government departments, steer them in the right direction, use AI to modernise off legacy, to break down the silos, to get data and pull it together. And candidly, sometimes I feel like some of my job is getting government to communicate to each other, right? And I think, Yatin, you've done the same. At points, you know, we have 3 different government departments in a room, and it's kind of the first time, you know, those 3 have spoken. They're all amazing people doing amazing things. So I think there needs to be much greater collaboration in order to bring, you know, us sat here as UK citizens, in order to bring us the efficiencies that we can see from the transformation. And I think the third and final thing for me that I would love to see is there's a lot of passion out there, and that's balanced with a lot of risk. I think there is a need to not stifle the innovation while we grapple on a daily basis with what the new technology is. The new technologies are coming out, and in order to keep up with the pace of change, we need policy and risk to be on board and educated and help keep up that pace so that the innovation is not stifled.
Brilliant, thanks. So that issue about communication and collaboration is really telling, I think, and I like what you say about having the professions come together and understand the importance. Yatin, your thoughts on the impact that you would like to see?
I think there were just 2 things for me. One, I think it is all about the data, to use that cliche. If we looked at the data we have, we are not Estonia. We have a lot more legacy than Estonia will, and Estonia is the equivalent of 5 London boroughs. So we have scale, we have legacy, but we also have a wealth of data that the rest of the world doesn't have. If we enable the sharing of that between departments, even if it was done as a, dare I say, a diktat or whatever, to just do that, and maybe digital ID is the mobilizing factor, I don't know, but that would be one big thing that would have real value for government and citizen services and overall for the country. And the second point is on collaboration. What came across was, and I won't get into sophisticated subsidiarity given who sat next to me here, but it's the challenge of the centre and the other departments, because there were views on the role of DCIT. How strong can it be? Some departments does it coach, some does it directly help. You need some clarity on how you're going to enable that transformation within the government machine, which isn't, I guess, for us to comment on, but it would just help if you had that momentum and impetus.
Yeah, so greater clarity as well. So Gus, we've heard more collaboration, professions working together, greater clarity at the centre. What would you like to see change as a result of the report?
Number one would be kind of, and this goes to the very top, getting the outcomes right and specifying what the clear outcomes we are. And if you think about what outcomes the people want, it's to be people-centred, right? So if you're a person and you're dealing with public services, say, you know, your mother has died, there's all sorts of issues that arise that cross departmental barriers, right? And we did just tell us once that as an example of that. But getting things which are customer focused, and so that is going to require departments to work together, and that's why I come back to that idea about the kind of replicating the NSC kind of thing. I think that thing about building it round what you're really ultimately trying to achieve is very important. And that gives you the data comparability and all the rest of it. And I think you can make huge progress if you get that one thing right. And this is not a new idea. John Major, Citizens Charter, it was like, that's what it should be all about. And it got derided at the time. But actually, this is what the public care about. And it goes to, and in a sense, we've talked about central government, but actually this goes to, it's not just about central government, because you think about what you care about, it's your interactions with the system. And that could be central government, it could be local government, it could be your local hospital, it could be all sorts of different things. So making sure that all of them have in mind the outcome that they want, which is clearly specified, and how they interact to deliver that outcome in a way that improves people's lives as much as possible.
Thanks. So really interesting what you've all said there in terms of kind of final thoughts on the report. I think it reflects those 4 areas. We're talking about digital transformation, but actually so much of this is about people and culture and communication and changing the way things are done. And actually only one of our 4 areas was around technology itself. So really, really telling, I think, in terms of those findings. We are dead on time. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who was joining us online. Thank you for those great questions. Thank you to everybody here in the room. Hope you've enjoyed that conversation. Thanks to Cognizant and AWS for being sponsors of the report and also today's webinar. We hope you will join us again for one of our webinars very shortly. We might have sent you a short questionnaire if you've registered and attended as well. Please take a few minutes to fill that in, because it means that we can always give you webinars on the topics that are of most interest and value to you. Thanks so much to our fantastic panel, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.